Some children do not grow up in homes where love feels steady. It comes in fragments, in moods, not in silence, in conditions they never fully understand. So they begin to study every detail. A face.a, pause.a, change in tone.a, door closing too hard. They learn that safety can disappear without warning, and because of that, the mind never quite learns to rest. It keeps searching, keeps calculating, keeps preparing for pain before pain arrives. What looks like overthinking in adulthood is often something quieter, older, and far more human. Not weakness, not attention-seeking, but a nervous system shaped by uncertainty. A heart that once had to become intelligent too early. A child who learned that if love could not be trusted, then maybe vigilance could. When safety feels fragile. It rarely begins with thoughts. It begins with atmosphere. A child enters a room and immediately feels the need to measure it, not with logic, but with instinct. Is this a good day or a bad one? Is the silence peaceful or dangerous? Is affection available, or has it disappeared again behind stress, criticism, distance, or coldness? No one explains this lesson out loud. The body simply learns it. In homes where love is steady, a child slowly relaxes into being. They do not have to interpret every glance. They do not have to earn tenderness through perfection, usefulness, or silence. They are allowed to be unfinished, allowed to make mistakes without fearing emotional exile. But an unloved child often grows up in a different climate, one where attention may come, but not warmth, where care may exist, but not emotional safety, where presence is physical, yet deeply absent. And so, the mind adapts. It starts to listen harder, watch closer, think further ahead. It becomes fluent in tiny changes, a sigh from the hallway, a shift in tone, a delayed reply, a face that suddenly looks disappointed. These details become survival data. The child does not call it anxiety. The child calls it being careful. Years later, that carefulness is renamed. Overthinking. Too sensitive. Too much in the head. Always assuming the worst. But the adult mind is often still doing what the child mind once had to do. Searching for the hidden rule. Trying to prevent the emotional injury before it happens. Trying to solve human unpredictability like a puzzle. Because unpredictability once meant pain. This is why even ordinary moments can feel loaded. A text message with a period at the end, a laugh that arrives too late. A loved one growing quiet for reasons that have nothing to do with abandonment, and yet the old alarm still sounds. Not loudly, just enough to unsettle the room inside. Overthinking is often misunderstood as excess thought, but beneath it, there is usually an excess of remembered uncertainty.
Not always conscious, not always visible, just present, like weather left in the bones, love that came with condition.
Children do not naturally assume they are hard to love. That belief is taught. Sometimes it is taught directly through harsh words, ridicule, or obvious rejection. But more often it is taught in subtler ways, through emotional inconsistency, through parents who are physically there but psychologically unreachable, through affection that appears only when the child performs well, behaves quietly, achieves something, or asks for very little. The lesson becomes simple, even if no one says it plainly. Love is not something safely given. It is something carefully managed. A child begins to notice that being needy is unwelcome, that sadness is inconvenient, that anger is dangerous, that joy can be ignored if it is not useful to anyone else. And because children are built to preserve attachment at any cost, they do not usually blame the adults. They blame themselves. Maybe the need was too much. Maybe the feeling was too loud. Maybe being easier would make love stay. This is where overthinking first deepens into identity. Because once a child believes love depends on getting everything right, the mind becomes occupied with self-monitoring. Every word is reviewed, every reaction is edited, every social moment becomes a test with invisible criteria. What did they mean by that? Was that annoying? Did something shift? Was there a mistake? Is someone pulling away? The child grows older, but the emotional math remains. They learn to over-explain before being misunderstood, to apologize before anyone says they are wrong, to replay conversations long after they end, to analyze faces, messages, pauses, and changes in energy, hoping to locate the exact moment they became too much or not enough. And beneath all of this is grief. Not always dramatic grief, often a quiet one. The grief of never being fully met. The grief of being shaped around the absence of tenderness, the grief of needing warmth, and learning instead how to be watchful, agreeable, exceptional, useful, invisible, or emotionally self-contained. Unloved children often become adults who believe connection must be maintained through effort, through interpretation, through anticipation, through never letting the mind go still enough to be surprised. Because surprise, once upon a time, did not feel romantic or spontaneous. It felt like the beginning of hurt. And so the mind keeps moving, hoping that if it thinks deeply enough, carefully enough, constantly enough, it can finally secure what was never secure in the first place. The brain learns to scan. The human brain is not shaped only by events, it is shaped by patterns, especially repeated ones. When a child grows up around emotional unpredictability, the nervous system adjusts to that environment with remarkable intelligence. It becomes alert, efficient, quick to detect what others might miss. This is not a flaw in development, it is development responding to conditions. Psychology often speaks of attachment, the invisible bond through which a child learns whether closeness is safe, reliable, and restorative. When that bond is unstable, dismissive, or inconsistent, the child may develop an anxious relationship to connection itself. Love becomes associated not only with comfort, but with uncertainty. Presence and fear begin to live in the same room. This affects the body as much as the mind. The stress response becomes easier to activate. The brain learns to prioritize threat detection. Areas involved in emotional alarm, vigilance, and memory become highly engaged, while true rest can feel strangely unfamiliar. Even in adulthood, the person may remain physiologically prepared for rupture, scanning tone, distance, ambiguity, and delay as if each might carry hidden danger. This is why overthinking can feel impossible to reason with. It is not always a philosophical habit. Sometimes it is the cognitive surface of a biological state. The mind is trying to create certainty because the body does not yet believe it is safe without it. So a harmless pause becomes suspicious. A neutral expression feels loaded. Silence fills itself with imagined meanings. Not because the person is irrational, but because the nervous system was trained in an environment where missing a signal could have emotional consequences. There is also the matter of memory. Not only the memories that can be narrated, but the ones stored as sensation. A tightening in the chest when someone seems distant. A sudden need to explain, the inability to relax after sending a vulnerable message. These reactions may arrive long before conscious thought can organize them. The body remembers the old world first. The mind arrives later to interpret the feeling. And this is part of the tragedy. People often judge themselves for being mentally restless, without realizing the restlessness was once intelligent. It was the brain adapting to a landscape where emotional weather changed without warning, where closeness had static in it, where love required study. The overthinking adult may look excessive from the outside, but inside there is often a system still performing an ancient task. Find the danger. Name it early. Prepare before it breaks the heart. The war inside the mind. By adulthood, the pattern no longer feels like protection. It feels like exhaustion. There is a particular loneliness in wanting closeness and fearing it at the same time. Wanting to trust, yet preparing for disappointment. Wanting to be seen, yet editing every part of the self before it can be misread. The mind becomes a negotiation table where every emotional risk is discussed, revised, and delayed. This is the private war overthinkers often carry. One part longs to rest inside love. Another part keeps its shoes on near the door. One part wants to believe what is simple. Another part scans for what is hidden. A kind word is received, but not fully. It is turned around, inspected, tested for weakness. Was it sincere.temporary.obligatory? The moment passes, but the mind stays behind to investigate. Relationships become especially difficult inside this pattern, because intimacy contains ambiguity. No one can explain every silence. No one can preempt every insecurity. No bond can remove uncertainty entirely. And for the person who once lived inside emotional instability, uncertainty does not feel neutral. It feels like a warning. So the inner monologue becomes relentless. Did that message sound cold? Was the pause too long? Did the mood change? Was the story shared too personal? Should less have been said? Should more have been said? Sometimes the person knows these thoughts are spiraling. They can watch the pattern happen in real time and still feel unable to stop it. That is because overthinking is not always powered by belief alone. It is powered by fear, and fear rarely surrenders to logic just because logic is present. There is also shame. Shame for needing reassurance, shame for feeling so affected by small things, shame for being intelligent in many areas of life and yet unable to quiet the mind when affection feels uncertain. This shame deepens the isolation, because now the person is not only struggling with fear of rejection, but also with rejection toward the struggling parts of the self. And still, beneath all the noise, something very old remains. A child trying to prevent emotional abandonment through vigilance. A child believing enough thought can create enough safety. A child confusing mental effort with love's survival. This is why overthinking can feel like both refuge and prison. It promises control, but asks for peace in return the moment they notice. Healing often begins without spectacle. Not with a breakthrough, not with a dramatic confession to the self. More often it begins in a small unsettling moment when a person notices that their reaction is larger than the present can explain. A delayed message creates panic. A minor misunderstanding feels devastating. A gentle disagreement opens a grief that seems older than the conversation itself. And for a moment, the adult sees it. The thought is not only about now. The fear is not only about this person. The body is responding as though something ancient has been touched. This realization can be painful, but it is also sacred. Because until then, overthinking often feels like identity, like personality, like proof of being difficult, unstable, dramatic, or broken. But once the pattern is seen in context, something shifts. Not the immediate feeling. The feeling may remain intense, but the meaning of it begins to change. What if this is not madness, but memory? What if this is not weakness, but adaptation? What if the mind has been trying all this time to protect a wound it never learned how to name? This moment does not erase suffering. In some ways, it deepens it. Because now the person begins to understand how early the loneliness was, how much of life has been organized around avoiding an old ache, how many choices were influenced by a fear that did not begin in the present tense. But there is tenderness in this seeing. The inner critic for the first time may soften just enough to make room for curiosity. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" the question becomes gentler. What happened to make my mind work this hard? That shift is subtle, yet profound. It moves the person from self-accusation towards self-witnessing. And self-witnessing changes the emotional landscape. Because patterns held in shame tend to tighten. Patterns held in compassionate awareness begin, slowly, to loosen. The person starts to recognize the old alarm when it rises, starts to notice the familiar hunger for certainty, starts to see how often the present is being filtered through the architecture of the past. Nothing dramatic may happen on the outside. But inside, an invisible wall develops a first small crack. Light does not rush in all at once. Still, the air changes. And sometimes, that is how an inner life begins to turn. Learning a different kind of safety. The mind does not stop overthinking simply because it has been understood. Understanding is the first kindness, not the final one. For people shaped by emotional neglect or conditional love, safety can feel unfamiliar even when it is present. A calm relationship may feel suspicious. A gentle person may seem hard to trust. Silence without hostility can feel almost unreal. This is one of the more heartbreaking aspects of healing. The nervous system may resist what the heart has long needed, simply because peace does not match the old map. And yet over time a new map can form, not through force, not through perfect insight, but through repeated experiences of emotional steadiness. A conversation that does not end in punishment. A mistake that does not cancel love. A boundary that does not destroy connection. A moment of vulnerability that is met with care instead of withdrawal. These experiences may appear small, but to the once unloved child inside the adult, they are profound revisions of reality. Gradually, the person begins to discover that not every pause is abandonment. Not every shift in tone is danger. Not every unresolved moment is catastrophe waiting to happen. The body does not learn this from theory alone. It learns it through contact, repetition, and time. Through enough moments in which disaster does not arrive. There is also a quieter layer of healing. The growing ability to offer inward gentleness where there was once only surveillance. To notice the spiral without becoming cruel about it. To feel fear without fully submitting to its story. To understand that the part still scanning the room is not an enemy, but an old guardian that has not yet realized the room has changed. This does not make life effortless. Some days the mind still races ahead. Some days the old ache returns with convincing force. Some days the person feels 10 years old in the middle of an adult conversation. Healing is not the clean removal of the past. It is the gradual integration of it. The learning of how to remain present while old weather moves through. And in that process, overthinking begins to lose its sacred status. It is no longer the only available form of protection. Other possibilities appear. Slowness. Discernment. Rest. The ability to leave some questions unanswered without falling apart. At first this feels fragile. Then, little by little, it begins to feel like freedom. The child still listening. In the end, the story is not really about overthinking. It is about a child who once lived too close to uncertainty and became fluent in vigilance because love did not feel dependable enough to lean on. It is about the intelligence of adaptation and the sorrow of needing that adaptation so early. It is about all the ways a mind can become crowded when a heart has never been fully allowed to feel safe. The adult may call it anxiety, rumination. Emotional intensity, trust issues. But underneath the language, there is still a smaller self listening carefully for signs that affection is changing, that warmth is leaving, that something unspoken is about to become another wound. That child deserves a more merciful witness. Not because the patterns are painless. They are not. They disrupt love. Steal sleep. Turn ordinary moments into private trials. But they were born from need, not failure. From deprivation, not defectiveness. The mind did not become restless for no reason. It became restless because stillness once left too much unguarded. And perhaps this is the deepest truth hidden inside the pattern. Overthinking is often the echo of unloved tenderness. A sensitive nature forced into defense. A soul that should have been soothed, but was instead taught to anticipate. A person who learned to survive by noticing everything except their own right to ease. There is grief in that. But there is also dignity. Because even now, beneath the repetition of doubt and analysis, there remains something unbroken. The capacity to feel deeply. To perceive nuance. To care with unusual precision. These qualities may have been burdened by fear, but they were never empty. They were signs of a human being trying with extraordinary effort to remain connected in a world that did not make connection feel safe. So the story closes not with certainty, but with recognition. The unloved child is not gone, only older, still listening, still learning the difference between danger and memory, still discovering that peace can arrive without asking to be earned. And perhaps, in time, the mind grows quieter, not because it forgets the past, but because something deeper than thought finally begins to believe love does not always leave.